Welcome. I guess we'll go ahead and get started. 1:45 on the dot. My name is Michael Jackson, and I'm here today to talk about Strata. Thank you. I'm here today to talk about a piece of software that I wrote called Strata. Strata is a modular HTTP server for Node. Okay, you can think about it as kind of like an Apache or an Nginx, except that the entire thing is written in JavaScript and runs on top of Node. I'd just like to thank Twitter. They're my employer. I'm currently employed by them working on some of their web stuff. This is my handle. Please give me any feedback that you have for this presentation via Twitter. That would be great. Just at me and say, hey, you suck, or hey, nice job, or whatever. That would be awesome. And then I will make them available, absolutely. Yeah, right now they're not, though. Sorry, I didn't know exactly where to put them. I thought maybe O'Reilly had a spot where I could put them, but if not, I'll just put them up on GitHub. Use the hashtag, and then I can find you easier. So Strata. I made this little website you can go to. It's just hosted on the Heroku free account, so it might crash if 100 people hit it at the same time. But basically, it's actually running on Strata, and it's the Strata website. There are a bunch of docs and things, including a pretty detailed user manual that I put up there that teaches you how to use it. So I basically said a lot of this already. It's a streaming HTTP server. So what do I mean by streaming and modular? So you know, have you ever browsed sort of the Nginx modules page and you see, okay, here's the core module, here's the rewrite module, here's the module for doing, running your Perl scripts or whatever. They have all sorts of different modules. Same kind of architecture, right? You can plug modules as you want to, or you can choose not to use some modules. Streaming means that, so if you've ever used Node, you'll be familiar with the concept of streams. It's kind of a new primitive that Node introduced. So Node generally tries to buffer as little data as possible, right? So everything's a stream in, and you've got streams going out. And those are first-class citizens in Strata. So you can essentially say, I've got a stream of data, and I want to send it to the client, and that's totally fine. That's totally valid in Strata. Written in JavaScript. It was inspired by WSGI and Rack. How many people are familiar with those specs? Just to give me an idea of the kind of audience I'm talking to. Okay, you'll feel right at home in Strata. We borrowed the best of those two frameworks. So you might ask, okay, so what is WSGI, what is Rack? So basically they boiled HTTP, the protocol, down to three things, okay? It's a little bit more, it's slightly more complex than this, but not much. There's a status, there's a bunch of headers that are sort of metadata about the document, and then there's a body, okay? These are the three things that make up an HTTP message, okay? Let's take a look. How many people know how to read HTTP? Yeah, it's a fairly common format. So first line up here, we've got our status, which is like the 200. So this is a 200 OK response. The yellow lines are both headers. One is saying this content is 12 bytes long. The other one is saying it's plain text. And then the body is in green at the bottom. And in this case, it's just a simple little hello world message. Okay. So in WSGI, you write an app, basically, that will return these three things, right? WSGI, this is the simplest, like, hello world WSGI app, right? You can see in the start response call, you give it the status, and this next thing you give a tuple of headers, and you return an array with the body. Rack had kind of a similar idea, right? This is Ruby code. The simplest possible Rack app is this one here. You've just got this lambda, which it returns three things, right? It returns an array with a status, an object, a hash of headers, rather, and a body, which in this case is a string, actually an array containing a string. So Strata is very similar. The very simplest Strata app looks just like this, just like the other ones, basically. You've got two parameters that come into a Strata app. You've got the environment, which is an object that contains various information about the server environment. We'll get to that a bit later. And then you've got this callback. just like a lot of things in Node, you have a callback. When you're ready to send the response to the client, call the callback. How do you call the callback? With 3 parameters. The first one is a status, the second is an object of headers, and the third is the body. Okay? In this case, the body is a string. But as I started out saying, streams are also first-class citizens in Strata. So I could just pass, for example, say I want to serve this file, hello.txt, right? I could say, fs.createReadStream to the file, create a readable stream, and just say, here's your body, right? We haven't read any bytes or anything off of that yet, but all we've got is just an open stream to a file on disk somewhere. And this works the same way with any stream, okay? But you might say, well, look at that. We've got that stat sync call in there. How can we get, Node is supposed to be async, right? What's the deal with this sync? Okay, so we could factor that out. This is a little bit more complex. So I apologize at the beginning for the sheer amount of code in this presentation. There is a ton of it. But hopefully we're going to start out small, and we're going to get to gradually longer and longer code listings. But by the end, you will have already seen most of that, so you can say, oh, yeah, I've seen that before, seen that. Okay, here's the interesting bit that we're looking at, right? I just want to provide complete code listings that are actually runnable. So every example, well, 99% of the examples that you see today are actually runnable. Okay, so anyway, we factor out that stat sync call. And remember I said that callback can be called whenever it's available, right? So in this case, it's actually deferred until fs.stat is done getting the stats for that file, right? And we'll call it just the same, create a readable stream and call it just the same. You'll see we've got like this utils.server error function. That's just part of Strata utils. That basically just sends a 500, says something went wrong, something blew up. Okay, so anyway, we've basically seen what an app looks like, but how do we actually run the app? Okay, high-level function called strata.run. Strata.run is used to run the app. So, in this case, you might have a file called app.js. You've got your app, and you could say require strata.run my app. The second argument to run is just this hash of options, right? The port that you're running it on. There are a bunch of other options. And you would just run this file with the Node executable. Node app.js runs, no problem. Another kind of cool thing that you can use is you can use the Strata executable. So Strata actually ships with an executable that you can use to run your Strata apps. If you're going to do it this way, your file, your app.js file, should actually export the app. Is that clear to everybody, how you export a function from a file using Node's kind of specific common JS module system? So anyway, you export the app, and then you'll say Strata, run that app, right? And you've got some kind of man-line flags, in this case, run it on port 3000. The Strata executable is actually kind of cool. So I built in, I actually just did this one last night, just hacked it in because I was like, that could be really useful. So the -r flag, basically what it says is, I want you to reload this app every 1 second, right? -r1. So like you're in development, right? You're writing code in the server, and then you go and you refresh your browser and you go look at it. And lots of times, if you don't have if the server doesn't have the ability to reload the code, then you have to like go, make some changes to your code, stop the server, restart the server, go to your browser, refresh the page, right? But that is not the case here. With the Strata executable, you can put it into reload mode, and it'll automatically reload that code for you. So that's kind of a nice thing for development. Don't use that in production. I built something else in, which is kind of nice. This is just a little nice thing. That basically just says, serve all files under the given path. That's kind of useful. You ever been on your laptop and you've been like, man, I really just want to serve like all the files in this directory over HTTP right now, so I can like, get around the like file protocol thing restrictions. Anyway, I digress. Getting away from the Strata executable. So this is an app. So how do we run this app? Watch closely. We'll just require Strata, and we'll just stick the app inside a call to strata.run. Done. It's running. Okay. But so we look at this app and we're like, okay, that's great, but okay, it's kind of annoying that we like pass these headers in every time, and it kind of feels bulky, right? So that's where we can do a lot better. We can use things called middleware. Okay. There are two particular middlewares that can actually help us in this case: Strata.content-type, Strata.content-length. These are middlewares that set the content type and the content length of the response on its way out. So the syntax would look like this. We say strata.use, strata.content-type, and here we pass a default content type. All of them different middlewares have like various arguments that they accept, right? So any extra arguments to strata.use are just sort of passed through to that middleware. So you use the content type and the content length middlewares. And then our app is a lot simpler, right? We just sort of give it the string. We don't have to give it any headers because those will automatically be calculated by those various middlewares on the way out. So let's kind of take a different look at what these middlewares actually are doing, right? So you can sort of picture in that last example, we had two middlewares around our app, right? So our app could be like this core thing, this core circle thing in the middle. And these middlewares are kind of wrapping it, right? And as a request comes in, it has to go first through the content type middleware, through the content length middleware, then it hits the app, right? Same thing, as the response goes out, it has to pass through the middleware as well to get back out to the client, right? So you can think of this kind of common pattern. So middlewares actually have the chance to modify the request either on the way in or the response on the way out, okay? And that makes them very, very flexible because you can use middleware for lots of different types of things. We're going to explore a few now. Nice thing about these middleware, one thing that I should point out is that a piece of middleware always has the same method signature as an app. That is, it takes those two arguments, an env and a callback, which allows us to do this easily. A very common piece of middleware is strata.commonlogger. Okay, this is like you're writing out your Apache-style common log statements, right, to a log file, right? So you could just plug it in like this to our app that we had before. Not much has changed, just strata.commonlogger middleware. And basically what that's going to do is that's going to write, when we get a request in that looks something like this, right? Somebody says get / it basically writes out a little request like this to standard out, okay? This particular piece of middleware actually will accept a stream as its second argument. So you can say, I don't want you to write to standard out. I want you to write to this stream over here. In this case, this is a stream to a log file. You see that? To that server.log file. So kind of nice, these middlewares. So we're looking at this app and we're thinking, okay, but we've still got that callback thing there. That's still a little bit unwieldy. Isn't there a nicer way to construct a response? Yeah, there is. You can use a strata.response object. So the middleware can help us clean up our callback code, but this is a nicer interface for actually constructing a response itself. Let's see how we might use something like this. So head back to our hello world example. The first argument to strata.response is like the body, so either a string or a stream, like we said. And then we just say response.send over this callback. Right? So what can that response object help us do? Well, this is kind of nice. Like nobody wants to build like a cookie middleware by hand, right? So response has this nice method set cookie, right? Set the cookie with name, give it this value on this domain, on this path. It expires at this time, right? Something like that. So that's kind of a nice thing that we can do. And it'll give you this kind of a response. It'll build this kind of a response for you automatically. Another way that we can use these response objects is we can actually just assign the values of properties like for various headers. So, for example, there's the date header in an HTTP response, right? So we could say response.date equals now, which is this date object. We've calculated 1 minute from now is now plus 60,000 milliseconds. So we'll say, this response expires 1 minute from now. And by the way, it happens to be in English, right? Content language is English, okay? So you can see how these things are, these response objects have getters and setters for all of the HTTP response properties. So it makes it really nice and easy to build responses. And in this case, you would get something like this. Your content language, your expires, your date, everything is set for you. So it'll understand, for example, if you pass in date objects, how to format them appropriately according to what the HTTP spec requires. So let's head back to that. Remember that example where we were kind of piping out this hello.txt file? This should look familiar from earlier. We were using that stat call. The only part that's really changed is now here we're using this response object. And that kind of looks nicer, right? Like I said, we can use a stream with a response. Stick the stream in there. Content length is this the size of the file. Last modified is the m time of the file, or the time that file was last modified on disk, and then send it over the callback. So kind of nice how flexible it is. You do a get on that, and it'll give you something like this, assuming that hello text contains that stuff there, hello world. So let's look at another piece of middleware. This one, for example, modifies the response as it's going out. Okay, so it's a common need to gzip stuff on its way out to the client, right? We want to gzip JavaScript and other text type assets, CSS and stuff like that. Make it smaller over the wire. So it's super easy actually. This is our normal app. A lot of this should look familiar. We're just giving hello world again. The only thing that's different now is we're using strata.gzip, right? And it's that easy because what's going to happen is this app down here is going to generate the response, and then on its way back out through the middleware stack, the strata.gzip is going to see that response. It's going to say, this is a text plain response, right? I can actually gzip this stuff. Nice thing is it's actually smart enough to check as well in the request headers whether or not the client is smart enough to understand gzip encoding, right? If it's not, it'll just pass it through untouched. But if it does accept gzip encoding, it'll gzip it and send it out. So that's a nice little thing there that you just drop that in, and all of a sudden gzipping done. And that uses a stream. That works with streams as well. Everything works with streams. Like I said, they're first-class citizens in Strata. So you send a request like this, you specify, make sure in the request you say, accept encoding, I accept all encodings, right? And then it will give you the gzipped encoding. Kind of fun if you run that app and you don't specify the accept encoding, you'll see the response come through as clear text. So it's cool. So so far, all of the middleware that we've seen is only just modifying the response object on its way out. Okay, so let's see what some use cases are for middleware that modifies the request on its way in. Okay, in order to understand that, first we got to talk a little bit about this other argument. So we've talked about the callback to death, about how you send the response, etc. We haven't talked at all about this env thing. So what is this env? Okay, so you might think, how many people have ever tried to write a piece of like Nginx, an Nginx module, or even just an nginx.conf file? You've written an nginx.conf, right? You've got these variables in there, right? These $ variables like request file name and host and things like that, the path info, the script name, things like that. This is Strata's equivalent of that environment, okay? This env object contains all of those properties. It's a plain old JavaScript object. What's nice about it is, so Strata is handling hundreds, possibly thousands of requests simultaneously because it's a completely asynchronous architecture. So what this env serves as is a nice request primitive, actually. Okay, so as a request travels through the stack, every piece of middleware or app that is involved in handling that request gets this env thing. And it knows sort of the context of what we're doing in that request, right? So we can store stuff in there, which is nice. You can also put custom variables in there that are specific to your app. So let's talk about one really common use of this env is like for storing sessions, right? So Strata's got a middleware called strata.sessionCookie. Okay, this is basically a middleware that it uses a cookie for persistence, but it implements HTTP sessions. Right, this is something that everybody needs to do on their, well, lots of people do very commonly anyway these days. It automatically takes care of serializing and deserializing the data to and from the HTTP cookie, and can even do so. Well, let's just take a look at this example. So, so you'll notice that we're using the Strata.session cookie middleware, and then in our app we actually have access to this env.session object. You see that? var session equals env.session. And it's just a plain old JavaScript object, so we've got properties on it, you know. In this case, we've got like a user ID property maybe. Maybe we put the user ID in the session so we can know who the user is when he's coming back to our website. If we've got it, we'll say the current user ID is that. Otherwise, we'll say there is no current user ID, right? Pretty simple example. Watch the line up here, the Strata, the line where we actually use the session cookie middleware. That will accept a hash of options. One of the keys is the secret, right? So if you've got some secret string, so on our last slide, this is going to send the cookie through. Like, it'll be very easy for somebody to decode that cookie and get all the information out of your cookie. If you use a secret, you can encrypt it, and then if somebody tampers with your cookie, it'll just be cleared whenever they send it back. So that's a nice little thing that you should definitely use if you're going to use this middleware. Another middleware that modifies the request on the way in is Strata.rewrite. Okay, so how many of you use Apache's mod rewrite? There's some black magic in there. There's it's actually one of Apache's most amazing modules, but you can get in over your head pretty quickly. Anyway, Strata.rewrite, basically Nginx has a rewrite module as well, and Strata's is pretty simple. So you just basically say, I'm using the rewrite middleware, replace requests that match this regular expression, with this string, right? So you've seen this before. You can say, for example, if I do a GET request for this hello.htm file, you can see in the app I'm actually echoing out the path info environment variable, and so you can see that's what comes back in the body is hello.html. Right, so that's an internal rewrite, right? We don't have to redirect. We don't have to send a 302 to the client and say, no, what you really want is .html. Go over here, and he has to make another request. This rewrite module lets us do an internal redirect. So we can say, oh, he requested this. What he really wanted was this. So all the apps that are downstream from this piece of middleware know I'm looking for hello.html, not hello.htm. Another piece of middleware that is actually extremely powerful and very interesting is the URL map middleware. So this middleware allows you to mount apps at different URL prefixes, so virtual locations. Have you ever used like an Apache virtual host? Name-based virtual host, IP-based virtual host. So basically what this will let you do is it's actually so common that I built it into the high-level API. So you don't actually use this one in the normal way. You don't say strata.use, strata.url map. You just say strata.map. Okay. So in this case, you check out this middle section. So all requests that begin with /files are going to get mapped to this piece of code right here. So what are we doing in this piece of code? We're actually using a few more middleware. It's kind of interesting. So we're basically saying we've got a root directory, which happens to be whatever the current directory is. And then we say use a file server, serving files out of that root directory. Oh, and by the way, if there's an index.html or an index.htm, serve those if the directory is requested. If that misses, then use this strata.directory middleware, which actually serves up like a directory listing. It kind of occurs to me that I should probably show that one in action. Let me head over here. Let me grab this guy, put it somewhere where I can actually use it. Let me kill that. So remember I said that strata-d will serve up the current directory. Let me let's see. Doop doop. So I could say localhost 1982. Oh, geez, not that one. Let's see. Okay, so you can't see it, but on my screen here, I typed strata-d for like the current directory. So this is kind of a this is actually interesting. You can see every single thing that I'm ever working on. This is the root of my projects directory, right? I attended a presentation by Mr. Parisi yesterday, and he was talking about the WebGL stuff. And when he said that, he said, go download this repo. And so I downloaded it, and he goes, oh, but most of that stuff's only going to work if you actually serve it over HTTP. So I was like, cool, I'll just use Strata and that's like one of the lamest examples I could have loaded. Let me see that. This one's really cool. So here I am like serving it off of my local file system. But you see like this file listing thing? That's a strata.directory middleware. That's what it does. Let's see. So let's go back. So basically what this request is saying is anything that begins with /files, go look in this root directory for that file, right? Notice that the /files prefix is taken off of the URL and put into the script name so that these middlewares know what file they're looking for. They don't have to account for the fact that the URL began with /files. You can also use a URL map in a much more powerful way. For example, we can do name-based routing, right? So this is host name-based routing, right? So I can say, if a request comes in, so I'm running example.com, right? If a request comes in for api.example.com, then use this app here. Otherwise, if a request comes in for example.com/files, something like that, right? Then use this app here, right? So you can see how this kind of mimics the Apache's virtual host behavior. It's kind of a nice, really nice actually, when you're running like multiple sites on the same process out of the same server. Indispensable, really. Strata.router is a routing mechanism that it's another popular middleware, so popular that I just baked it into the high-level API. It mimics Rails and Sinatra's kind of routing mechanism. So you say, for example, something like this. You say strata.post/tweets. So let's pretend like we're building Twitter, right? So I'm going to, when there's a post request to this URL /tweets, call that app. Otherwise, when there's a GET request to /tweets/some tweet ID dot some format, call that next app, right? Notice in this middle app here, in this .get app, the route information that we got out of the route is stored in env.route with the same name as the symbol that was present in the URL pattern that we provided. So that's kind of a nice thing to be able to use that. And then this delete is kind of like the same way. When there's a delete to /tweet/some ID, you get the idea. Let's flesh out that get example a little bit more and show you, in case you didn't catch it, like how we could use it. So let's pretend we've got this hypothetical tweet class, and we say tweet.find by some ID that was in the route, right? And then we'll switch on the format that the client wants, and we'll say, oh, they want JSON? Well, let's give them application JSON, right? And the response body will be the JSON representation. Otherwise, they like XML. We'll give them text XML. So that's kind of how you might use something like that, in case it wasn't clear from before. So one object that is really nice, gives us a lot of kind of tools around this env object. It gives us a lot of ability to extract things from the environment, is strata.request. Okay? So you basically just instantiate a strata.request with the env. It's very simple. var request is strata.request with the env. And you've got a whole ton of really useful properties. You've got the request method, what time the request was made, the remote address of the client and the remote port, right? So you know where this request is coming from. If you needed to do something like IP blocking or something like that, you could easily do that. The query string, are we using SSL? Is this made, is this an XML HTTP request? the host, the port. You can actually reconstruct the original URL. I don't know if you've actually tried to do that from within a server environment, but there's a lot of guesswork that goes into that. For example, it could be that your app is running behind Apache, right? And so Apache, or it's running behind Nginx, like a reverse HTTP proxy, right? And so it doesn't tell you a lot of this real information, right? So you have to be able to account for that, and Strata.request accounts for all of that stuff. So it'll make sure that, wherever I'm sitting behind, I know how to retrieve this information using like X forwarded headers and things like that. You can also do really good content negotiation with this request object. So we have these methods, accepts for, do you accept this content type? In this case, this would this request.accepts text HTML, that returns a Boolean value, right? Does the client accept text HTML content as indicated in the accept header? Do they accept the English language content? Do they accept gzip encoding? Do they accept UTF-8 charset? So things like that can help you to do content negotiation with smart clients who actually pay attention to this kind of stuff. As HTTP is maturing and evolving, stuff like this is going to get more and more common. I think wouldn't it be really nice if I could if I didn't have to have like a /en/whatever in my URL, and I could just say that information should be in the accept language header. Right? It makes a lot more sense. One URL, multiple representations based on what you accept. So as we evolve, we'll build apps that are smarter. They can use that kind of stuff. This is a trivial example. I just use in this middle body here, I say, do you accept text HTML? If so, great. We'll give you HTML. Otherwise, you just get plain text. Really simple example. Request also has a request object also has a method called cookies. Surprise, surprise, you get access to the cookies that were sent in the request. So pretty standard stuff. In this case, you get the cookies in a callback. And that's because Strata tries as hard as it can to not buffer anything. Okay, so even the cookies that come in a header, we're going to pipe those through as we read that information in, and then we'll give you the cookies when we're done parsing it. And that's just a plain old JavaScript object keyed by the name of the cookie. This one is kind of the big daddy of the request methods, which is params, right? Everybody wants to know, what are the params that were passed into my app? Params can actually be passed in a lot of different ways. But first I'll just go through this little example. So we'll say, again, you get your params in a callback, and you'll say, for example, down in this middle section, pretend we're doing a post to /tweets, and we just do mass assignment, because everybody loves mass assignment there. We say tweet.create with these params. And then we'll maybe set a 201 header or something like that, a location header saying, hey, here's where to go get this tweet, right? We're being good HTTP citizens. But like I said, this method is really loaded. I mean, when you think about how many different ways params can be passed into your app, they can be passed in as a query string. Okay, those are params, right? They can actually be passed in as an application xwww form URL encoded body, right? So that's basically a query string that's in the body. They can be passed in, for example, as JSON, right? Say you've got a URL where you say we accept application JSON requests. They can be passed in. Oh, those are params. Here's the messiest one. What about form data, right? So somebody's posting a file to your web server, and they're like, Here's a photo. I'm uploading a photo, right? You actually get a multi-part message that you've got to parse, and that's not easy. That's kind of a pain. Strata.params or request.params lumps all of those params together and basically says there are query params, there are body params. Okay? If you want just the query params, use request.query. You want just the body params, use request.body. You want the union of the two, use request.params. So it makes it very easy. And handles multipart and handles all that good stuff for you. In fact, let's talk a little bit about the Strata.multipart. So the core of Strata.multipart is a really fast parser by Felix GE from his what was it called? There was a Node formidable project. Yeah, I contacted the author. I said, hey man, you've got a nice parser. I want to take that parser, put it in my project, and put a API around it that functions with the rest of Strata. He's like, go for it. So it's MIT license. So I stuck that in there, but props to him for the speed on it. It's really nice and fast. So basically, if I were handling a multi-part request, I could, so first of all, I've got this multi-part module up here at the top. Notice that. And then I could just say, in my request.params, as I'm looping over all of the params that I got in the request, I say, is this param a multi-part file? No. If it is, it's a multi-part.file object, and we can handle that specially. Otherwise, it's just a string. So let's pretend like we've got a form like this on our website, right? Post, we're encoding it as multi-part form data. We've got this input name photo, and it's a file input, right? So this is somebody's going to choose a file on their computer. They're going to upload it to our website and submit. So this is probably the longest code listing you'll see, and I apologize for that ahead of time. But like I said, we know most of it. The interesting piece is in the middle here, right? We say request.params. In the callback, we say, okay, we've got this photo variable, which is params.photo. We know we're expecting an input with name photo, right? If there's no photo, we say, sorry, your photo is required, right? Set the response. If it's not a multi-part file, in other words, somebody's trying to hack us, right, and they didn't use the form properly, we say, sorry, go back and use the form properly. It must be a file upload. This photo has a type property. So multi-part file objects actually have four properties. There's type, path, name, and size. Okay, so type is the content type. And we can just do a quick test and make sure that, okay, the content type was image, so we know that this thing is an image. Otherwise, we're going to say, sorry, it must be an image. So if they try and upload a PDF or something, we don't want that. And in this simple example, all we're going to do is we're going to stream it right back to the client. So this is kind of cool. We'll say response.content type is the same content type as what the photo was. Response.content length is the same size as what the photo was. And then it's got this path property, and that path property is a string that points to the name of the file on disk, because when you streamed it to some temp folder somewhere, and we just use the operating system to, figure out what's your temp folder location. Okay, we're going to stream it there, and then we'll just stream it right back to the client. So that's really useful for doing photo upload or doing uploads, file uploads, and things. And I mean, it couldn't possibly get easier than that. One thing I wanted to talk about is testing. So how do you actually test Strata apps? So there's a module included called strata.mock. Using strata.mock, you can actually completely customize the request environment, and then you can test the things that come back out of your app, right? So in this case, I've got an app. It's our same old Hello World app, and I say mock.request / from that app. And then this function is going to give me, any error that happened when I was actually made that call, and then the status headers and body that came out of it. And so I can use assertions, and I can say, make sure the status is 200, make sure the body is this, the headers are this, type of thing. Okay. This is actually one of the huge advantages that you get by creating an abstraction on top of the objects that Node gives you, the request and response objects that Node gives you, because you cannot recreate those trivially in a test environment so I don't know if you've tried to test an Express app, but you can't recreate those objects to pipe through to your Express app because Node created them, right? For testing streams, there's actually this mock stream thing. So notice that in our app, we're writing out to the error stream. Okay, so I told you this env object is loaded. There's all sorts of stuff. There's an input stream, and there's also an error stream. So to the error stream, we write boom. Right, that doesn't go back to the client. Maybe that's some logging data. That's just like I said, that just goes out to the log. But we still got to not barf on the response. We still have to send an intelligent response to the client and say, okay, something bad happened. Where's the 500? My bad, right? So if we want to test, for example, that something actually did get written to the error stream, like I said, so the first parameter to mock.request, and the last one was just a string with a slash, right? It was just saying request /. Well, in this case, we're actually we're actually passing an object, which just basically says, use the properties of this object as the properties of the environment, okay, and of that environment object, and then obviously merges in all the other properties that it needs that aren't actually there. But basically what we're saying is we've got a mock stream, which is this buffer thing, this buffer object that we created. It's just some dummy object that's just there to collect data. And so basically in our assertions we can say assert equal buffer.data to boom, right? So in other words, all that's saying is make sure that this string was actually written to the error stream, right? And you can actually use mock streams for a lot of things. Like for example, you could mock the input stream to your app, right? So if you've got a ton of data, you want to test what happens when somebody sends you this massive fatty multi-part message, right? Say instead of error, just say the input is this readable stream to this file, that we got that one time, and we noticed that our server totally couldn't handle that request, but we logged it, so we're good. So let's pipe that thing back to our server and create a unit test to make sure that doesn't happen again. So there's a ton there. There's a lot more that I want to show you, but I did want to have time for one or two questions. I think I may be out of time, just a minute over. But if I do have one or two questions, and then I will be downstairs immediately after this talk. If you want to come and talk further about Strata, I'd love to talk to some of you about it. So are there any quick questions? In the back.
Looks like it's similar to Express, maybe lower level than Express. What's the main use case for choosing Strata over Express?
Yeah, so Express just didn't do a lot of the things that I needed it to do. This is designed to be a lot more powerful than Express and just a lot more flexible to use. I mean, the mocking objects thing, you can't do that with Express, right? The virtual hosts thing, the URL mapping, you can't. Express doesn't have this concept of having an environment, a proper server environment, right? Express basically gives you the request and response objects that the Node HTTP server gave you, right? So if you want some app downstream to know something, you're hanging properties off of those objects, right? Which were never intended to be that way. Luckily, JavaScript is forgiving and lets you do that kind of thing. But those objects were never intended to be used that way. So this is a higher level abstraction that gives you, I feel, a lot more power and control over the actual request response cycle. Any other questions? Yeah.
So how can I use this with the node cluster?
I'm not sure. Yeah, sorry. So the question was, how can I use this with node cluster? And I'm not sure. I've never used a node cluster before.
So if I have a machine has
Multiple cores, yeah.
And then I just use one thread.
A Strata app runs in a single process, yeah. So if Node Cluster is able to run multiple processes and sort of manage those processes independently, if that's what it does, which is what it sounds like what it does, then you could spin up a separate process using the Strata command, or using the Strata executable, or using the Node executable directly to your application file.
I don't think it's any different from using Express. You still have to have a share nothing kind of stateless architecture for managing your state in the back end. So you're going to have Redis or something like that in the mix.
Right. Share nothing architecture is absolutely vital to something like that.
Yeah. I mean, so node cluster takes care of listening the same port with using multiple cores. So I'm not sure about Strata, how to listen.
Strata's just built on the core HTTP library, though, right?
Yeah.
Then it should be.
There should be a way. I mean, we could look into it. There should be a way to do it pretty easily. One more question, maybe?
Thank you.
Nope. Thank you.